Okay, so hi everyone and welcome to the Motivated Cognition meetings, our new virtual talk series in which we will cover the interplay between motivation and cognition from different perspectives. And today we're happy to have Dr. Julia Spaniol with us. Thank you very much for being here. And so this talk series is currently organized by Dr. Kainer Simon and Dr. Colleen Frank, who are located at the University of Texas at Dallas, and by Dr. Sebastian Horn and myself, located at the University of Zurich. We would like to thank the Society for the Science of Motivation for its support, especially the current president of the society, Dr. Alexandra Freund, who came up with this idea and who encouraged us to initiate this series. And so our plan is to have a 35-minute presentation and then 25 minutes for discussion. And to pose a question, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. So you can type in questions both during and after the talk, and we will make sure to read them out loud. It's also possible to directly ask questions yourself. In that case, just type the word questions and we will call on you in person later. We will record the session and we will upload the recordings on our website. So please be aware that if you turn on your camera, you will appear in the video. And so without much further ado, I'm now happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Julia Spaniol. And so Dr. Spaniol directs the Memory and Decision Processes Lab at Ryerson University in Toronto. Her lab uses a combination of behavioral and neuroscience methods to study how motivation and emotion affect cognitive processes in younger and in older adults. And so her work examines emotional influences on decision-making, motivational influences on attention and memory, and also age-related differences in prosociality. And today her talk is titled Age Differences in Drivers and Consequences of Epistemic Curiosity. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Spaniol.
Thanks so much, Zita, and thank you, Sebastian, Kendra, and everybody else who's involved in organizing these meetings for having me as your second speaker. I'm really excited to be here and excited to share some of this work. And my first test, of course, is can I work Zoom? Yes, okay. And I hope that everybody can see. All right. Okay, so as Zita was saying, the title is Age Differences in Drivers and Consequences of Epistemic Curiosity. My affiliation is actually Toronto Metropolitan University. We used to be called Ryerson, but the name changed last year. Bit unusual for a university to change its name. It's a long story. I'm happy to share that at some point, but maybe not during my precious 35 minutes. So before I jump into the talk itself, I'd like to acknowledge that this is really my PhD student, Leanna Skorsky's work. Leanna just offended just about a month ago, and she's currently off having fun. I tried to coax her into maybe co-presenting. She would have none of it. So I'm going to do my best to try and sort of impersonate Leanna and talk about this stuff as knowledgeably as she would. I also want to acknowledge other lab members that have contributed to these studies in one way or another over the last couple of years. First, I'd like you to look inside and probe your own general knowledge about pop culture. Which artist has won the most Grammy Awards ever? And as you ask yourself this question, please try to assess your own state of curiosity to know this question, assuming you don't already know the correct answer. Okay, are you a little bit curious, a lot curious, or somewhere in between? Okay, and then I'll tell you what the answer is. It's Beyonce. Okay, it's not something I knew, but now I do, and I forget exactly how many Grammys she's won, but it's a lot, more than can fit on one mantle. All right, now to something more familiar to most of us. we're not rock stars. The experience of reading a book, a cognitive activity that we all engage in. It involves lots of cognitive functions, some of which would fall under the header of fluid cognition. So things like attention, cognitive control, episodic memory, encoding and retrieval. And we, of course, know that fluid cognition shows age-related decline. This is a very familiar picture that we've probably used in our slides, those of us who study cognitive aging. The cool colors here represent fluid cognitive functions like working memory, speed of processing, and long-term memory, and they do show that decline over the lifespan, whereas semantic memory and world knowledge are relatively stable or even show some improvement as we get older. So finding strategies for mitigating age-related cognitive decline in fluid cognition is kind of the holy grail of cognitive aging research. And motivation happens to be one of those things that have been shown to successfully improve, sometimes hurt, but mostly improve fluid cognition. And motivation comes in different guises. A person might be reading a book, for example, in order to get good grades or to land a job, a well-paid job after graduation. Or they might be reading that book because they're a member of a book club. And so ultimately reading the book serves to maintain a social connection. Or they might simply be interested in the content of the book. Maybe it's some sort of World War II military history treatise, and that happens to be an area of interest. So in other words, motivation can be sort of more extrinsic or more intrinsic. This is a distinction that has been popularized within social psychology and has kind of entered the general lexicon. It is not a clear-cut distinction at all. I would not say that extrinsic and intrinsic motivation can be neatly separated, but it is a useful sort of heuristic for distinguishing the different types of reasons why somebody might be engaging in motivated behavior. And I would argue that intrinsic motivation becomes increasingly, or may become increasingly important as we get older. And why is that? There are a number of potential reasons this could be the case. For one, we know that the brain changes as we get older. For example, broadcast neurotransmitter systems like norepinephrine and in particular dopamine change as we age. Goal orientation changes as we age. There are important lifespan theories of motivation that delineate what people care about and what kind of drives them changes over the lifespan. The degree to which we have access to prior knowledge and rely on that prior knowledge changes with age. And finally, our environments also change with age. So we may not actually have as much access to extrinsic rewards as we get older compared with younger adults who are getting grades and jobs and new relationships, etc. So all of this may contribute to a kind of more salient role of intrinsic motivation as we get older. So today I'd like to talk about 4 studies, well, really 3 studies, and one of them contains 2 experiments. The first is a meta-analysis on age differences in motivated cognition. And I'm presenting this one because it kind of sets the stage for what comes after for the piece about epistemic curiosity. So in the meta-analysis, we asked, does older adults' cognition benefit more from intrinsic motivational incentives? In studies 2 and 3, we focus on age differences in epistemic curiosity, or the desire to know information, to learn new information. And first, we focus on age differences in causes or drivers of epistemic curiosity. And then we look at age differences in the cognitive impact of epistemic curiosity. What does epistemic curiosity do in particular to our memory? So jumping right in, the first study is the meta-analysis, which was published earlier this year in Journals of Gerontology. Again, we wanted to do a quantitative synthesis of the aging and motivated cognition literature, which funnily enough had never been done before. The first broad question was, is older adults' cognition less sensitive to motivation in general than younger adults? This is somewhat simplified, but I think it does follow from the dopamine deficit hypothesis of aging, which says that because of this decline in the dopamine system and in kind of the motivation cognition interface on a neurobiological level, we should also see a reduced behavioral impact of motivation on cognitive performance in older adults. And the second question was whether age differences in the effect of motivation on cognition would depend on incentive type. And this broad prediction or question is posed by psychological theories of lifespan motivation that, for example, emphasize that older adults may be particularly sensitive or susceptible to socio-emotional incentives as opposed to, for example, financial incentives, to gain versus loss incentives, etc. We included studies that had a motivation manipulation or a comparison of some kind between control and motivated conditions. They also had to include healthy younger and older adults, sometimes also middle-aged adults. And they had to report the effects of motivation or, of these different motivational conditions on a cognitive task, either in the domain of episodic memory or in the domain of cognitive control. We also looked at other domains, but those were the two that had the most studies. And then we computed effect sizes for the age by motivation interaction. So this is, it's a little bit unusual to meta-analyze an interaction effect, right? We're more used to seeing meta-analyses of main effects. But really the questions that we were interested in were about age differences in the effects of motivation on cognition. So, those are captured by this interaction. And as you are probably familiar, meta-analytic results can be visualized with these forest plots. And I'm just showing a hypothetical forest plot here where the different studies are down the left. Their individual effect sizes, and in this case, again, it's the age by motivation interaction effect size, are shown in the squares, and then the meta-analytic effect size is shown in the diamond at the bottom. And we coded the studies in such a way that a greater effect of motivation on cognition in older adults would be expressed as a positive effect size, and a greater effect in younger adults would be expressed as a negative effect size. Okay, so that's how you will be able to read the next few graphs. In the domain of cognitive control, there weren't that many studies, but you can see when you look all the way to the bottom that the pooled effect size, or the meta-analytic effect size, that diamond, is right near the zero, the midline, meaning no age by motivation interaction, no age difference in how much motivation affects cognitive control. And the same thing happened in the domain of episodic memory. Again, here we have more studies, over 70 studies, but if you look at the diamond at the bottom, the meta-analytic effect size is about zero. And we confirmed these null effects with a base factor analysis as well. However, for the domain of memory, the effect sizes were significantly heterogeneous or mixed. And therefore, we were justified in doing a moderator analysis. And as part of a series of moderation analyses, we found that in the domain of memory, we did have an incentive type moderation where financial incentives were more effective for younger than older adults. So for studies that used financial incentives, you can see that the pooled effect size is negative, meaning a greater effect on younger adults. In contrast, for studies that used socio-emotional incentives, the pooled effect size is positive, meaning that older adults on average were more susceptible to socio-emotional incentives in terms of their memory performance. And there were other results, but these are kind of the key ones that are relevant for the next parts of my talk. So we found that with respect to the first hypothesis, no, older adults was not overall less sensitive to motivation than younger adults. So there's really no behavioral support for this hypothesis, even though, of course, the data here are don't speak directly to neurobiological mechanisms, but we don't see this hypothesized behavioral sort of downstream effect of a dopamine deficit. With respect to the second question, are there age differences as a function of incentive type? Yes, we did see that. And that kind of, again, provides rationale for the next studies, which are empirical studies, which focus on one particular type of socio-emotional or intrinsic motivator, namely epistemic curiosity, or the desire to learn new information. What is epistemic curiosity? Intrinsic desire for new knowledge. That's a very common definition, although the extent to which it's really intrinsic versus ultimately and extrinsically fired desire is could be debated. Epistemic curiosity is very intimately tied to prior knowledge. So if those of you in North America, if you watch Jeopardy, then you might perk up a little bit when the candidate chooses a category that you have some prior knowledge about, because for those categories you might have a strong hypothesis about some of the answers, and when you don't know an answer, you're really kind of on the edge of your seat and you want to see what the candidate says and whether it's the correct answer. So how curious you are tends to depend on the state of your existing knowledge. We also know that epistemic curiosity supports learning via attention. It focuses attention, it energizes information seeking or exploration, and it can enhance memory. And strangely enough, it is understudied in older adults, which is too bad because, given what I just said in the previous bullet point, these are all things that we would like to kind of encourage and improve in older adults, these fluid cognitive domains. We'd like to see older adults kind of work those muscles, and curiosity might just be an avenue to doing that. And of course, a very low-cost avenue. And in fact, a few years ago, Michiko Sakaki published a really nice review paper entitled Curiosity in Old Age, a Possible Key to Achieving Adaptive Aging. And it's a great review that kind of looks at neurobiological aspects, but also at psychological theories that speak to, or that kind of help her make the case that we should all be looking more into curiosity in aging. So in the first empirical study, as I said, we wanted to find out more about drivers of curiosity in younger and older adults. And this study is currently under revision and hopefully, fingers crossed, will be published soon. So what is it that stimulates our curiosity? There are a number of kind of time-honored theories here, starting with Daniel Berline's work from the sort of mid-20th century. In these theories, there's an emphasis on incongruity or expectation violation. Like in this Escher image, we kind of do a double take because something's kind of incongruous and doesn't make sense. Information gaps are, there's literally a theory called information gap theory by Lowenstein, very influential, whereby curiosity is greatest when we have some knowledge. We have a moderate degree of knowledge, but then we detect a gap in that knowledge and that we are very motivated to fill. And finally, a newer perspective considers curiosity to be a function of the organism's goal to maximize the cumulative value of the information that it holds. And so cues to value of information could be social, it could be practical, it could be the future value of information, etc. So this is kind of a newer perspective that I'm actually going to emphasize here because this is what inspired the experiments. With respect to social value cues, Dubey and colleagues very recently published a study that looked at how younger adults use social value. And another word for social value is simply popularity. Younger adults avoid information. They are not at all curious about information that they know has not been well received or highly ranked by others. So for example, if you see a really devastatingly bad review for the Barbie movie, you might be less likely to be curious about that movie and go see it yourself. younger adults also, their curiosity is a measure of to what extent they think the information might be immediately useful to them. So they seek information with high personal usefulness. So for example, I would wager to say that most younger adults for sure, don't tend to know a lot about the Manhattan Project or nuclear physics, but once the Oppenheimer movie came around and it sort of became part of the public discourse, knowing about nuclear physics and the Manhattan Project became valuable in a personal sense because it allowed you to participate in the public discourse. So with respect to aging, we hypothesized that social value and practical value would continue to be important for older adults' curiosity and information seeking, but that the specific cues would change a little bit. We hypothesized that older adults, because of the positivity bias that has been well supported in the literature, would be more curious about high popularity information. So when older adults see that others have already endorsed something, then they're also more likely to be curious than when they don't obtain that information about others' opinions. With respect to practical value, we were inspired by the large and growing database on prosociality and aging, and we suspected that older adults would be curious about things that concern not only themselves, but also the collective. And so that was our prediction for experiment 2. And we made these predictions with respect to curiosity as well as the behavior that comes out of curiosity, namely information seeking. Experiment 1 asked how does social value influence curiosity and information seeking in younger and older adults. Here we had 202 participants recruited from MTurk, and in the orange boxes, you can see how these samples compared. There's always a bit of concern with online samples or with laboratory samples for that matter, about how well matched the groups are. Here, luckily, the groups were matched on education and on trait perceptual curiosity. Older adults, as usual, had higher vocabulary and more positive affect, lower negative affect, and also lower trait epistemic curiosity. This is something that the differences in trait versus state curiosity are kind of an interesting kind of sidebar that I don't have time to say too much about, but maybe we can discuss later. So in the first part of the study, they did a rating task in which they saw a series of general knowledge questions, like the one shown here, what's special about CO2 that we added to water and not other gases. And if that sounds a little funny to you, it's because it's a user-generated question on Reddit. So it's an actual internet thing. These items were collected by Doobie, and we simply recycled this collection of real-world trivia questions. And participants then made a curiosity rating. And they did this for, I believe, 20 of these items. And some of these items were actually quite popular on Reddit, and some were not so popular on Reddit. And popularity is captured by something called upvotes, basically like likes. So what are the advantages of trees keeping their leaves, shedding their leaves versus keeping them all year round? That's apparently a question that nobody finds interesting. So it has a low popularity rating. Okay, so participants in the control condition saw these questions without information about the upvotes. Participants in the upvote visible condition did see the upvotes. And I don't know if you knew this, but Reddit actually got rid of downvotes. They don't do that anymore because, I don't know, mental health and all of that. But now the same information is basically conveyed by low upvote counts, right? So if you only have 6 upvotes, that's really bad news. And people are very sensitive to that upvote information. Okay. In a second phase of the study, participants had the opportunity to reveal the answers to these same questions, which were presented again in a random order. And again, those in the control condition did not see the upvotes. Those in the upvote visible condition did see the upvotes. And we put the curiosity ratings into an MLM analysis, and I'm just showing sort of the key results here. You can see that we have younger adults on the left, older adults on the right. Curiosity is the dependent variable here. We have low versus high popularity items along the x-axis, and we have the two between subjects conditions, control versus upvote, visible. And as predicted, younger adults, of course, they are more curious about high popularity items than about low popularity items. That's not very surprising. In a way, it's reassuring. But critically, for the low popularity items, it really mattered which condition you were in. If you were in the upvote visible condition, you would be even less curious about these items than you would be in the control condition. So younger adults are less curious when they can see low upvote info. That's exactly like what Dubey had found. For older adults, also as predicted, it flips around. Again, they're more curious about high popularity items, just like the younger adults, but they are more curious as well for high popularity items when they can see the high upvotes over here. So we have this sort of nice dissociation where for younger adults, the action is on the negative end, and for older adults, it's on the positive end. How does this relate to information seeking? Oh, I have these arrows. Forgot about that. Information seeking. Now here we have brain-centered curiosity on the x-axis, and we have reveal probability, or this, whether or not they flipped the card to see the answer to the questions in phase 2. And there's a positive relationship between curiosity and reveal probability, but that relationship is stronger in older than in younger adults. So it appears that older adults actually relied more heavily on their own curiosity to decide whether or not they wanted to spend the extra time to learn the answer to the questions. Moving on to the second study, practical value. How does practical value influence curiosity and related information seeking in the two age groups? 312 participants, similar demographics. By the way, I forgot to mention earlier in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, it's very typical for MTurk. These are largely white or Europe of European descent adults, particularly among the older adults. There is some representation of other races and ethnicities, but probably not enough to really look systematically at differences. Otherwise, the groups were similar on these relevant background variables. Something I also forgot to mention is that we did include any variables that the groups differed on. We used as covariates in the models. So this experiment focused on practical value. And again, participants first did a rating task. They read a single article, and first they were told what the topic of the article was, and they gave a pre-reading curiosity rating, some sort of baseline curiosity. And then they did another curiosity rating afterwards, and we actually looked at the change in curiosity from pre to post as our dependent variable here, because we wanted to control for baseline differences in curiosity. Participants in the control condition read an article about how fruit fly reproduction research advances science. And this is considered of low practical value because, basic science is not something that's high on the kind of a hierarchy of needs for your average person. And you don't need to read the entire paragraph here, but it's the yellow highlighted passage that kind of contains the critical information. So basically, this is about fascinating biology, basic science. Those assigned to the collective practical value condition read the same article, but now the emphasis was on how fruit fly research advances climate change action. And so the topic is the environment. And if you just look at the yellow highlighted passage, this is about engineering new solutions for saving the environment, and et cetera, et cetera. And finally, the personal practical value condition, here the article was tweaked so that it would be about human medicine cures, and the topic was medicine. And so if you look at the yellow highlighted passage, this is about curing diseases and helping the current generation of young adults. We created a parallel version of this for the older adult participants, which makes reference to older adults, just to make sure that it was a fair comparison for the two age groups. After reading the article and rating their own curiosity, participants had the opportunity to learn more about fruit flies, and they were able to reveal up to 10 fruit fly facts, not specifically facts about the passage that they had read, but anything about fruit flies. So this is sort of a more expansive or exploratory type of curiosity that could manifest here. And it is the number of these facts revealed that we'll use as our measure of information seeking. Okay, so first looking at the curiosity results. Again, we're looking at the curiosity increase from pre to post as our dependent measure. And then we have the two age groups, and we have the 3 between subjects conditions. And younger adults were most curious after reading the high personal value article, the one about medicine, compared to the other 2 versions. Older adults were equally curious after reading the high personal value article and the high collective value articles. So medicine and the environment were sort of equally apt to elicit curiosity in older adults. With respect to information seeking, the number of facts revealed is now the dependent measure, and we have, again, the same predictors. You can see that younger adults reveal the most facts after reading the high personal value article. Older adults reveal the most facts after reading the high collective value article. And curiosity also played into this. Curiosity was, again, a positive predictor of information seeking, but more so in older adults. So that violet or darker slope is steeper than the light blue slope for the younger adults. Again, suggesting that curiosity serves as a stronger kind of selectivity cue for older than for younger adults. So the last study I'll talk about focuses on age differences in the cognitive impact of epistemic curiosity, and specifically with respect to memory. So consequences of curiosity for recognition memory in younger and older adults. And the study is basically in press. I'm never quite sure what it means to say conditionally accepted, but hopefully soon in press in Psychonomic Bulletin and Review. Okay, so to remind you of 20 minutes ago, when I asked you about Beyonce, and you rated your own curiosity about how many Grammys she has won, or rather, it wasn't about how many Grammys, it was who is this person, and the answer was Beyonce. If you were not at all curious, then you are now less likely to remember the correct answer. But if you were very curious, then you are more likely to remember about Beyonce, not just now, 20 minutes later, but also, say, in a couple of weeks. So high curiosity information tends to be better remembered. This isn't exactly a shocker, and it has been found in many studies. This link between curiosity and memory has been linked to activity in mesolimbic dopaminergic system, hippocampus, and the frontoparietal attention network. And although most of these actually, I believe all of the neuroimaging studies have been done in younger adults. However, behaviorally, the effect is similar for younger and older adults. We've also done a study in my lab that I don't have time to talk about. Again, Liana was the first author of that study. And sure enough, we found the same thing. Curiosity was very much a predictor of memory success in younger and older adults. However, so far, studies have focused on recall memory, or specifically cued recall. And they usually use this trivia paradigm, these trivia paradigms where, similar to the question about Beyonce and the Grammys. What about recognition memory? Recognition memory in many ways is even more fundamental to functioning in everyday life, the ability to tell what's new from what's old, and to resist false friends, right? To be able to spot things that are in fact not old, and to recognize them as new. Older adults are especially bad at this. They're vulnerable to false recognition because they rely so heavily on their semantic memory and basically on what's plausible, what makes sense. And that sometimes leads them astray. So in this study, we wanted to kind of tweak this trivia paradigm that's been used so much in the memory literature, and focus on false memory. And we asked whether the benefits of curiosity would extend to recognition memory in general, and specifically whether curiosity would protect against false recognition. 102 participants. And this was a 2-day study. And on day 1, participants did a trivia rating encoding task, which looked like this. I believe they saw 20, or actually, I can't remember the number of items, but it doesn't matter. They saw questions like this: what industry used 20% of China's harvested plants? They had to rate their curiosity, they had to rate their confidence. Then they had an opportunity to guess the answer, and then they were shown the correct answer. On day 2, they got a surprise false memory recognition task. So here's some of the items they saw were correct pairings of trivia questions and answers, and some were incorrect. And among the incorrect ones, the lures, some were related lures, so naturopathy is related to medicine, and some were unrelated lures. So automobile is not related to medicine, so it's an unrelated lure. We hypothesized that curiosity would support correct recognition and that it would reduce false recognition. And we were especially interested in whether curiosity would specifically reduce false alarms or false recognition when the lures were related, when they were harder to resist, essentially. So for correct recognition, we see here once again these upward going slopes. Mean-centered curiosity predicted hit probability or correct recognition in both age groups, but more so in older adults. So that the slope is significantly steeper for older adults. False recognition, here it's particularly interesting. For younger adults, there was actually no effect of curiosity on younger adults' false recognition. So even though it looks as if for unrelated lures there's a positive slope, the variability is really high, and these lines are not significantly different from one another. For older adults, in contrast, there was a reduction of false alarms to related lures as a function of curiosity, not for unrelated lures, only for related lures. Okay. So to wrap up, and I'm sorry, I've already exceeded my 35-minute limit. Study 1 showed that older adults' cognition benefits more from intrinsic or socio-emotional incentives. Study 2 showed that value of information, or perceived value of information, drives curiosity in both age groups, but in different ways. And curiosity bears a stronger relationship to information seeking in older adults than in younger adults. And study 3 showed more pronounced cognitive gains in older than younger adults, specifically with respect to being able to withstand false memory. So theoretically, I think this research program highlights a few things. So first of all, motivation is a viable cognitive enhancer in older adults despite dopaminergic decline. Secondly, I think overall this kind of fits into a trend in our field that moves away, has been increasingly moving away from a cognitive deficit view of aging, kind of listing all the ways in which things go downhill, and towards a more differentiated, nuanced picture that focuses on what younger and older adults do differently in order to achieve kind of adaptive goal pursuit, selective goal pursuit in their respective environments. A new finding here is that older adults rely more heavily than younger adults on their curiosity as a selectivity cue. And I think this might actually present a challenge to socio-emotional selectivity theory, which posits that as we get older, information acquisition goals become less salient and kind of wane, whereas emotion regulation goals come to the foreground. These data don't really mesh very well with that idea. We also found additional evidence that information value is related to or predicts curiosity and information seeking. Practically, I think we have to pay more attention to curiosity when we design environments and technologies to support lifelong learning. In particular, perhaps when we think about how to support older adults and maybe other vulnerable populations in the digital world. Digital literacy, of course, is really important, and older adults get targeted a lot by spammers and scammers and fraudsters online. So being able to resist misinformation and false memory online is really key. In terms of future directions, I think we need to get better at inducing curiosity, not using trivia so much, and also at measuring curiosity. And that could involve using more dynamic, ecologically valid stimuli, varying the valence and arousal of those stimuli. For example, it would be interesting to look at morbid curiosity in the context of aging. We also should rely more heavily on physiological mechanisms of curiosity and curiosity satisfaction, and differentiate state and trait curiosity. There are some interesting dissociations with respect to age differences in those two. Older adults are very much capable of state curiosity, but their trait curiosity seems to decline. And finally, and this is unfortunately a recurring refrain in our world in psychological science, we really need more diverse and representative study populations, and this is probably not going to be achieved through MTurk or Prolific. We might need to, and I'm saying this to myself as much as to anyone else, do the hard work of working with other populations as well, community samples, et cetera, to learn about the generality of the principles that we're uncovering here. So thank you so much, and sorry for going over time. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can more easily discuss.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spaniol. So if anyone has questions, feel free to use the Q&A function. Again, you can either type your question, I'll read it aloud, or you would just type question and we'll unmute you so you can ask yourself. To get us started, I'll go ahead and ask one. So what's the relationship between social value, or that popularity, and the practical value? Are those two related as well? Can you tease them apart? Is there any way that you can control for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think value is, of course, we think of value as being a common currency that can be informed by many inputs. It's hard to draw a hard line between social value and practical value. I think I do think there's something special about social information, and I'm actually really intrigued by this. That's finding the study with the upvotes, and I'd like to pursue that line further, because how we if we rely on other people to determine what to engage with, what to spend time on, and what to seek out more information on, that is, that's a little different than, say, basing those same decisions on whether or not something is going to be immediately useful, like next week, to us. It is a more fundamental a principle at work there, and we are social beings. And I think the reason why using upvotes and from Reddit is particularly interesting to me is because we all spend so much time in these environments where we so readily are presented with aggregate data about popularity, right? So I do think that social information is particularly potent, and I also think that this is probably a profitable area if we're looking for age differences. I don't actually think that older adults don't care about negative social information. So, kind of made strong conclusions based on the results of this one experiment. But as I said, I would be very interested in also probing negative social, not ratings necessarily, but reputational information, and how that guides people's selection, again, of what to investigate further, what to engage with intellectually. These are just, societally really important phenomena that, as cognitive psychologists, we don't often engage with, but I think they're really interesting. So I didn't provide a very clear answer to your question. I don't think they're fundamentally different, but I think that they are complementary and sometimes, overlapping.
Great. So there's another question. So how does your research speak to the distinction between the different types of curiosity, information gap versus exploration?
So the exploration versus information gap views are, I think, both grounded in reinforcement learning. So in the idea that information is reward. What they differ in is in the specific relationship between prior knowledge and curiosity that they stipulate. In the exploration, or Berline's view, also the nomad model, for those of you who are familiar with this field, it's complete novelty that elicits the highest degree of curiosity, because you have the most to learn. Whereas in the information gap theory, it's actually an intermediate degree of prior knowledge that is associated with the highest degree of curiosity. Our experiments were not really designed to adjudicate between these views. The rational model of curiosity, Dewey's newish model that places an emphasis on information value, tries to kind of reconcile the two types of theories by saying, well, in certain environments, it's novelty that drives curiosity. In other environments, it's actually this U-shaped kind of intermediate prior knowledge that drives maximum curiosity. So it's a function of the ecology. But again, we didn't really try to tease those apart. I think that would be interesting. It'd be interesting to use a model-based approach and apply that to data from younger and older adults. But to my knowledge, that's really not been done.
Great. So now we have a couple questions from the audience. So the first is from Kim Chu. Just find her, make sure unmute her.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for the great talk. I was curious what, just in thinking about your data, I was curious what you think about these findings sort of relative to time horizons. So we think about like reward seeking as, relative to opportunity cost of time. And I think you could sort of think about information seeking or curiosity as subject to similar, I guess, trade-offs with time, especially you take the time to seek out the information. And it seems like there's some interesting findings here when you think about time horizons with younger versus older adults, because globally older adults have less time lifespan wise potentially, but in the short term they might have more free time, or they might as opposed to younger adults who have like potentially more day-to-day responsibilities. And so I was just wondering if you could like speculate on time costs or time horizons relative to your data.
Yeah, I think it's with respect to what we actually observed here, the type of engagement that we tapped, this was on the order of minutes. So we're not really looking at engagement over longer stretches of time. So here what's really most relevant is how much time you have in the here and now, rather than how much lifetime you have remaining. I'm actually not sure that these older adults have more time than these younger adults. They're all people that are, by definition, they're MTurk workers. So they're all, probably working jobs, gig work or what have you. So that assumption may not be 100% correct.
Mhm.
It's hard to say. We didn't ask them how much available time they have.
Yeah.
What I would say though is that, again, older adults were actually more selective. Younger adults spent a little bit less time on average. So older adults, I think in both experiments, searched for more information overall, but maybe more importantly, they spent more time on the information they were most curious about and less on information they were not as curious about. So I think it's the selectivity rather than the total amount of effort or time that is most intriguing.
Great, thank you.
Great. Next up, we have Alexandra Freund.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. I was wondering when you gave us the trivia question, and I have a couple of questions. So the trivia questions in the beginning, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm just not a curious person, but that doesn't have a lot of value for me, informational value. So I know Beyonce got the most. What do I know beyond this? Nothing. So either I'm interested in Grammy Awards, or else it doesn't tell me much. So these kinds of trivia questions, I'm wondering, do they really tell us a lot about curiosity or where the interests of people lie? So if I'm interested in it, then yes, I want to know. Then it's an information that's valuable. But other than that, it's sort of like, doesn't have a lot of information and value. And related to the, I was wondering whether you believe that positive or negative or neutral information actually carries the most informational value. In our studies, we find typically that if you just compare positive and negative, you get very different results than when you include neutral kinds of information. And we do find that there is a huge preference for looking and picking neutral, at least, sources. Our thought behind this was that probably people feel that this is the most informational value, much more than when people are agitated about something, either positively or negatively. That they feel like, okay, if there is no hype or trashing involved, maybe it gives me the most information. You didn't have a choice, but I was wondering if you have ideas about those, and that might also get at your, when you looked at the future directions, the role of arousal and so on. Of course, neutral is the least arousing one, so it might actually be the most curiosity driven. So I'm not looking for something that excites me positively or negatively. I'm looking actually for information. So I was wondering whether you thought about neutral information that's neither positively or negatively valenced in a way.
Great, thank you. Those are excellent questions. And as you already pointed out, they're maybe not addressed by the study so far, but they would be really interesting to explore in the future. What you just said about neutral information being more valued than positive, or especially high arousal positive and negative information, is a little bit surprising to me, frankly, because clickbait tends to be, by definition, designed to induce arousal, right? To get get people's heart rate up, and force that engagement, draw attention. I wonder if there's a bit of a cultural difference as well, between Swiss people and North Americans. I feel like advertising and the principles that we see at work usually are such that make it emotional, make appeal to the make people cry or make them laugh or something. So even when in North America, if you give a talk, you're always supposed to start with a joke or with something,
if I may, that's why I said, like, then it would be more curiosity driven and not arousal driven. It's not like, oh, I want to get excited, or I want to, so, and that's what I meant. Then it wouldn't be driven by seeking excitement, but it would be driven by actual curiosity.
Yeah.
Sorry for barging in.
Yeah,
So,
no.
I don't think that there are cultural differences actually.
You don't think
But
so? Okay.
but maybe this research is unemotional. There could also be that the stereotype, who knows, maybe it's like totally accurate. But
I'm German too, so I get to apply
but
stereotypes.
but I'm not sure that there are so many, I mean, clickbait and so on, the same mechanism work here, but I would argue that that's not information driven. It's not driven by curiosity, but it's driven then by wanting to get it. And that's a different motivation behind it, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. So thanks for pointing that out, and drawing a cleaner line between the different modalities of input or the different qualities. I think in the experiments here, emotion was relatively de-emphasized, although likes, in the online context, likes and upvotes and so on, social value is sort of inherently tied up with an emotional appraisal. And your first question, I'm sorry, I wrote something down, but now I can't remember what exactly you had asked. Would you be able to remind me of the first part of your question?
No, I have to remember. No. I forget to, so forget it.
Okay.
Sorry about
No worries.
Okay, I think we have time for about one more question, maybe. So this one is from Cyan Lee. My basin's in primatology, and I'm working on social information or social cues, influence on curiosity regarding contagion in humans and non-human primates. While doing this research, I get so many questions about how to distinguish conformity-based or conformity-biased social learning and curiosity influenced by social information, for example, popularity. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about that. I'll also unmute you to ask, see if you want any follow-up or if I butchered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't mean to write the whole description of it. So just to make it briefly, yeah, I worked on like social curiosity contagion in non-human primates, especially chimpanzees and humans, and also did the pilot study. And so many times, most primatologists and psychologists ask me, how are you gonna distinguish it from like a conformity bias social learning? Because if it is so popular to others, then it's just conform to this information and try to accept it. So how are you gonna distinguish it from like so-called pure curiosity? And I want to listen from your thoughts.
That's really interesting. So do people select popular information because they want to conform to what the majority does, or is it really an expression of their curiosity about this information? Maybe a way to distinguish between those two would be to manipulate the publicness of the choices. Conformity isn't as much of a factor when you make very private decisions, as was the case in these experiments. Of course, it's not as if anyone was looking over the participant's shoulder, although they knew that the data were being recorded, but I think that's a pretty weak type of social situation. Whereas if you're doing this in the presence of others, in group settings, then you're creating conditions where conformity can really be influential. I think that would be interesting to do. And maybe curiosity could conform to conformity. I don't know, maybe I don't know that these are necessarily completely separate, but you might also genuinely, if you're in a context that imposes a strong kind of social conformity, this might in fact influence your kind of epistemic needs as well. So I don't know that these are completely separable, but yeah, very, very interesting questions.
Yeah, because when I did experiment with chimpanzees, they were super interested in others' behavior, which we showed right next to the room. And then they were like just trying to copy it. So we were really interested in whether this is really curiosity-driven behavior or it's just like to copying or imitation behavior. So that was the...
And did you ever do this with other chimps watching versus not?
Yeah, we also did. Yeah. And it was very different results.
Okay, I think we are right at time. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again so much for your wonderful talk and the discussion. We have our next one is on October 26th, so in a month from now. Forgetting who is next, if any of the organizers. Dr.
Ruth Kustas is next.
Perfect. So we will see you all then.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.